So now we have to figure out, is there some kind of, between these two positions, is there some kind of possibilities, or is there some type of openings that we can talk about for the Jewish people? And one in particular thing I want to talk about tonight, however, is the Old Covenant. Has anybody ever heard that term before, the Old Covenant? Okay, let me just write it up here.
Yes.
There's a lot of talk today about the... Okay. There we go. Old Covenant. Okay. Now, what is the Old Covenant? Why am I so concerned about this? Well, because it deals directly with the Jewish people. And we really have to know this because we need to know the truth. Okay? Does the Old Covenant have any relevance today? Can it be said that the Jewish people still have the Old Covenant as they did in the Old Testament? Okay? That's a big question. My answer to that is no, but possibly there are some times we can say yes to that. Okay? And I want to show you how we can do that. I want to try to take it all apart and then put it back together for you. Okay? First, let's find out what the Old Covenant is. The Old Covenant is mentioned one time in the Scriptures, in the New Testament Scriptures, that is, in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 14. And Bob, would you turn to that for me and read that passage? 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 14. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 14.
17 or 7?
2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 14.
But their minds were blinded, for until this day remaineth the same veil untaken away in the reading of the Old Testament, which veil is done away in Christ. Okay, so there you have it. It says Testament there because that's an older version. The older versions use Testament, the newer versions use Covenant. That's the only time that the phrase appears in the New Testament. At other times, it's called the First Covenant, as it is in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 18, or Hebrews chapter 10, verse 9. So Bob, turn to Hebrews again, chapter 7, verse 18, and read that for me. For there is verily a disannulling of the commandment going before, for the weakness and unprofitableness thereof.
Okay, the commandment there is referring to the covenant. And he says again, Bob, read it again.
For there is verily a disannulling of the commandment going before, for the weakness and unprofitableness thereof. Okay, so in other words, the old covenant was weak and unprofitable, and so therefore there had to be a disannulling of that covenant. Okay? That's one indication we have that something's going to happen to this old covenant. Okay? Read 3 chapters later, chapter 10, verse 9. Then said he, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He take away the first, that he may establish the second. Okay. He takes away the first, that is the first covenant, or the old covenant, so he can establish the second, that is the new covenant. Okay? Pretty simple? Pretty simple. Okay? So why all the controversy? All right? Well, Jesus says in Matthew 5, verse 18, why don't you turn to that while I'm talking about it? Matthew chapter 5, verse 18. He says, I have not come to destroy the law and the prophets, but to fulfill. Okay? And then he goes on to say, not one jot or tittle shall indeed pass from the law until all is fulfilled. Okay? So here you have Jesus on the one hand saying, I have not come to destroy the law, that is the old covenant. I have come to fulfill. Now some people will look at this and say, well, you see, it says he's not going to destroy that law. In other words, it must survive, right? So how could it be disannulled? We got a problem here, right? Yeah, because the Hebrew writer said that there's a disannulling of that covenant
And he said it twice, as a matter of fact. As a matter of fact, he says it 3 times. Because if we go to chapter 8, verses 7 to 13, we'll find the same thing. Okay, that the old covenant is disannulled, it's taken away, it's set aside. He uses all kinds of verbiage. Okay? And Jesus is saying, I have not come to destroy that old covenant, but to fulfill it. Okay? Well, there's one easy way to handle that. Jesus is talking on the Old Testament side of the cross, right? Because he hasn't gone to the cross yet. So we're still in the Old Testament when he's saying these words in Matthew chapter 5, when he's giving the Sermon on the Mount. So he can't actually be doing away with the Old Covenant because he's in the Old Covenant, you see. The temple curtain is not going to be torn until Jesus actually dies on the cross. And that's what the Hebrew writer is saying. When Jesus dies on the cross, then the Old Covenant is set aside. Okay? So that's one way to look at this with Jesus. He says, I have not come to destroy it. Well, of course I can't come to destroy it. I'm in it. What am I going to do with it? Well, I'm going to fulfill it. Because what did the Old Covenant say about me? It said I'm going to die and rise in the 3rd day. Okay? So that's how I'm going to fulfill it. But once it's fulfilled, then what do we do with it? Okay? Well, then the Hebrew writer comes in and says, well, then it's disannulled, you see. It's set aside because it's not needed anymore. Why? Because it's already been fulfilled. Jesus fulfilled it. We don't need it anymore. Okay? Well, that makes sense. Okay? Well, if that's the case, then why does Paul in Romans 13 say that if you really want to love God, then obey the commandments? You know the commandments. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall not steal. You shall not commit adultery. Okay? Where do they come from? They come from the Old Covenant, don't they? Okay? Yeah, they come from the Old Covenant. So in a sense, the Old Covenant is still surviving somehow, isn't it? Okay? Because that's where Paul's getting those commandments. In the New Testament, he's quoting them. Well, our catechism says the same thing. Half of our catechism is based on the 10 commandments. If you look at the catechism, you see? And it's amazing the way that thing's put together. Okay? So, yeah, I would say that Mosaic law in the Old Covenant has a lot of relevance today. You see? So then, but how can the Hebrew writer talk about the Old Covenant being disannulled? You see? And set aside. So here's where we are in a little quandary. All right? And we have to figure out, well, what is this solution? And theology is all about making the proper distinctions. Okay? Anybody who's studied theology long enough will tell you that. Make the proper distinctions, put everything in their proper category, and it will all begin to make sense. And that's what we're trying to do here with this Old Covenant. Okay? Now, let me give you an example. When we wrote the Constitution of the United States,